created this series so that you would have an opportunity to see a whole variety of colors and also intensities all in one space, and maybe have an opportunity to kind of have a reaction to that. Because the color impacts our minds and stirs our hearts, right? I mean, just imagine a world without color. Like, we Coloradans really don't like what's been happening the last couple of days. Because there hasn't been much color coming forth. So what I want to do today is talk about two different processes. The process of creating a series, and then the process of creating an individual painting. So as Gundy alluded, or said earlier, she offered the opportunity for me to do a solo show, and I think it was either December 2019 or January 2020, doesn't matter necessarily. It was that time frame, and I remember I just had a real strong visceral reaction. She said 2021, and I went inside, yes, a whole year. And instead of, oh man, only a year. No, it just felt really right. At that point, we didn't have a month or anything, but I knew I had a year. And one of the reasons is because I had just started working in a new medium called cold wax with oil, or oil with cold wax. And I will talk about that some more when I talk about the individual process, painting an individual painting. So I took a workshop from Trish Reed, who is local, on cold wax in January, and that was like, you know, the jump start to really get me going. And I love the physicality of cold wax and what I could do with it. But the big question was, how do I create a show that impacts people when they walk in? Because that's what I wanted to do. And being a kind of results-oriented person, I wanted to kind of put words around it. And meanwhile, I was painting and painting and trying to figure out this medium. I changed my medium several times, so I know that it's not a snap. It takes legwork. You really got to put the paint down and try it out. So I also wanted to create so the other thing was, well, it's got to be about color, right? I mean, after all, I've written a book about color. So, but how is that message about color going to be conveyed in this series? And then the other thing, so color, impact, and the other thing is I wanted to paint about the forest, about trees, because trees have been a part of my life my entire life. I used to escape to trees as a kid, and to get away from the house, and I would spend hours alone in the woods in suburban Philadelphia, digging, clawing, looking for gold, capturing tadpoles, climbing rocks. I just loved the woods. And then I did several paintings that celebrated trees and color, but I was overdoing it. I ran into a brick wall. I was overthinking it. I didn't like what was happening. I had to let go of the trees. That was very disappointing, but I said, you can't have color, impact, and these other intentions, and the forest, you can't do it. If you had 10 years, maybe you could do it, but you can't do it in a year's time. So then the other thing I also had to decide was, the tree is so much a part of me, they're going to show up anyway. I don't have to force it. So that was a real important turning point in creating this series. And then on August 18th, I was blindsided with a medical diagnosis, and I have multiple myeloma, which is a uncurable blood cancer. And I have good news, we'll get there. But as you can imagine, when the C word enters your world, things change rather significantly. It also opened a Pandora's box, a several other medical concerns. But what did I do? I kept painting. I had to. The alternative was not pretty. So, in other words, I'd be depressed or what have you. The other thing is I entered another world of uncertainty. I like to use the analogy of diving boards. You know, we were all already on the first diving board. We were all already in the uncertainty of the pandemic. Then I had the uncertainty of creating a series. I was like, okay, that puts me on the, what is it, 7.5 meter diving board? Okay, all right. Well, now I have cancer. Oops, you're just, hey man, you're hanging out up here. But I also have a history of doing a fair amount of risk taking. And I also think as artists, we sign up for uncertainty as creatives, because we don't always know what the outcome is going to be, and we don't always know what the response is going to be from other people. Of course, it also depends upon what our objectives are. So, to give you an example of my risk taking, at the age of 25, I graduated with a master's degree at Psych. I finished my internship in Jeffersonville, Indiana, which is right across from Louisville, Kentucky. I'd still say it not quite correctly, but I had a master's degree in Psych from Indiana University, and I didn't know where I was going to go.
Master's in Insight?
Educational psychology.
Educational psych.
Okay, which makes me, in the educational world, a school psychologist. So I just finished that internship. So I got in my car, and I drove 3,000 miles around the western part of the U.S. I went to Durango, up to Utah, I camped, saw a brother in Caldwell, Idaho, and started going back east and heading for Minneapolis. I knew 2 people there, and I had spent a summer there. So I drove into Minneapolis, and I decided, yep, this is where I'm going to live. And I drove back to Bloomington, or Jeffersonville, Indiana, packed up a U-Haul and moved to Minneapolis. So just to give you an idea of some of the, so I was kind of familiar with taking risks. So I painted through this whole time period where early diagnosis, it was totally unsatisfactory. I had no focus, but I just painted because it grounded me. Then I took a step back this week and I went, okay, what's the timing on all of these paintings? And I thought I'm bringing this up because I thought you might be interested. The paintings in this show were either created between February and September or November and March. There are no paintings in this room that were painted during that time period, which included a couple of surgeries, and then the final diagnosis is that I have smoldering myeloma, which means no treatment and means I'm smoldering, and so it can, but in other words, it's they don't use the word remission so much in that cancer, so that's the good news, all right, and I'm still there. That's the good news. So it's interesting during that whole time, I thought, I don't know if you find that interesting or not, and now there are a couple of paintings I painted during that time that are under a couple of these paintings. And there are a few paintings that are previously loved paintings, meaning, 2019 paintings. But many of the other paintings, they were left behind. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the title. I was also like, what are you going to call this? Because that's one of the things, you know, a solo show, you got to have a title, you know? So color, and then I started noticing that this horizontal line was showing up. And what is a horizontal line? A horizontal line implies calm, stability, distance, expansion. I said, yeah, that fits. And so I combined color with landscapes. And I had a fun little light bulb experience in my studio, and I put those 2 together. But just FYI, there are 5 lines in art. So there's a vertical line, the curve, which you will see. I use the other lines too, zigzag, diagonal and vertical, horizontal, diagonal, zigzag, curved. Now, during this time, I almost quit and almost backed out, and I almost called Gundy and said, I can't do this. So that was very much there. But no, I'm kind of like the little engine that could, and I had to do this. One other important decision I made in creating this series is I stopped posting on social media. I decided I was being too easily influenced by people's comments. Not an easy thing to do, Dave. And I like to show people in process. That was another interesting decision that I made. I'm very glad that I did it. The other thing I wanted to mention is it's hard to articulate how special it is to create a body of work and then to see it displayed in a lovely gallery like this one. So does anyone have any, before I go into my painting process for individual painting, any other questions you might have about creating the series? Because I can, okay.
I have a quick question. So how many times have you done this type of series? I mean, is this, you know?
In my art career?
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably about can we include a two-person show?
Yeah, yeah. I was just wondering if this is something you've done 100 times?
Oh, no,
or
no,
this is
no, it's
10
not
times?
something that I've done for many times. The good news is the fact that I have done it,
Mhm.
made it helpful. Particularly when I had those medical challenges. It's like, I can do this because I've done it before.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing that up. That's a good point.
How many years have you been an artist?
Okay, I started painting again at age 36. Between the ages of 21 and 36, I stopped. I decided when I was an art major that I couldn't make it as an artist, so I just went cold turkey. I was not willing to compromise. But I think the saddest part is that I didn't have anyone to go to. And if someone had introduced me to restoration, museum curation, other options, I probably, first of all, I would have been good at any of those, I think. But I would have gone that direction. But we're talking 1969 and a small university, and at that age, I didn't know how to ask for help. I've learned that lesson. Okay, so cold wax. I'm gonna.
And you're 39 now, right?
Yeah, going on 70.
1 year.
Yeah. So I'll start out with talking about an individual painting. I make a decision of the color palette. That is the first decision I make. And sometimes I do these little color swatches to say this is going to be the color palette for this particular painting. And then after that, I totally let go of the result of the painting. I have no preconceived idea of where it will end up. And it's a really interesting and I think healthy metaphor for life is letting go. So you'll notice in those photographs, you know, I turn the board, I mark, I use my left hand, but I stick with the color palette plus black and white. Now you may ask, do I ever change the kind of color palette? Maybe toward the end if I think it needs a little sparkle something. But for some reason that gives me a whole lot of freedom. I see it as freedom, I don't think of it as limiting. Because I have all these other options. So I stick with the color.
You do one painting at a time, or do you roll around doing stuff?
It really, she's asking if I do one painting at a time. Generally, but it's not uncommon for me to have a painting that I think is almost done, set it aside and go, I got, this one's really bugging me, I gotta bring it back. I mean, so I don't have dueling paintings, no. I think maybe that's what you're, no, I don't do dueling, but I will bring the painting back if it doesn't seem quite resolved.
How long does it take a layer of your oil to dry?
Well, It's made out of beeswax, odorless turpentine, and
She said it was beeswax.
linseed oil. Now, it is not encaustic. Encaustic also uses wax, and the wax is also beeswax, but they use a heating process. And it's very toxic, but it's quite a different process. It's easy to get them confused. So I take a scoop of this lovely stuff, and just for your information, I have gone through an entire gallon of this. I inherited this color, this tube, and I never use it, so there's your oil paint. And usually it's 50-50. It always has to be more oil than wax. You don't want more wax than oil. And then it's combining those two. So you still have you still have a good sense of, it's not quite as thick as pure cold wax. The oil does loosen it up a little bit. And then there's all these tools. Here they are. That you use to apply it. So, and this took a while. So I go and I have my thing, and then I take this and I go over. Sounds easy, but it takes a while. Anyway, that's, huh?
I asked Susan, it looked familiar.
And this is soft. Squeeze usually come in different sizes. And then another real favorite of mine is this rubber roller, and I have to get that evenly, and it's not uncommon for me to have 3 of these in a hand and another one, because I'll have 4 different colors, 4 different values of one color. That's how I get the gradation. I love gradation. This is what I mean by gradation. I love to create that, even here, it's in most of the painting. And that's done, because I came up with my own little technique, using, it's not a brush, it's these.
Oh,
How long do you have to work with it before it sets up?
Okay, yeah, the timing question. So timing is also a really, thank you, a really interesting element to this medium. Because when you first put on the few layers, it's what we call wet on wet, and you get up to about 3 or 4 layers using the squeegee, credit cards, this kind of stuff, lots of different ways to apply the paint, and then I have to back off. And I literally, at least 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, because I want it sticky. And it's another thing you have to learn how to, as an artist, it's just, you go up and you touch it. Okay, is it sticky enough? Not sticky enough. But if there's a certain technique I want to use, I'm committed to working on that painting. I can't go away for a week. I mean, I can, but then I lose what I could potentially do with that sticky time period, if you will. So some of these paintings are done fairly intensely in a couple of days because of the time. And then there's also times toward the end of the painting where I want it to be completely dry, so that I can, in fact, do some of the feathering and things I like to do with a brush. So the next fun part of it is all the textures. So some of my, so it's gotta be tacky, it can't be dry, because I'm going in with the roller, pressing this down and pushing this down in there. And one of the real popular, where I get a lot of that organic kind of sensation is using tissue paper. And again, it's gotta be a little tacky. I go like this, put it over the, see, and I don't always know what's gonna happen. And I roll it in there. So Russ, there's a fair amount of that back in there. The other thing I can do is I go like this and plot it into the my favorite scraping tools. Anyone remember what this is?
Watering.
Yeah. So, I go and I've got all these layers and I start to scrape, and like this, I don't know what's gonna come up underneath. And this was not gonna be tree painting, just FYI. And I started removing, and I'm going, wow, that's so cool. Man, that's a tree if I've ever seen one. And a tree painting. So, I mean, so those are I really enjoy that kind of spontaneity, intuition, the uncertainty, not knowing. Now, every time I use this tool, do I like the result? No. So then I have to quit because it's so wet. And I still have some paint on my palette. But then there's so many more layers. Let's see, so there's texture, I mean, it's just, and there's dripping. Okay. There's some liquids we can combine with the oil and cold wax, and you squirt this down. Whoops. I can use an eyedropper. You have to wait 2 or 3 minutes, and what it does is it removes. So a lot of these places where you see drips, that's how it's created. It's from.
What's that called again? What you're talking
I'm calling it dripping, but I don't know.
about? What's the product?
Oh, I can't remember.
Oh, look at how fine that is.
Yeah. Tile tools.
So Carol, what makes you look and say, I'm gonna try dripping on this versus scraping? It's just like in your soul or something?
Yeah, it's intuition. Okay, and that adds, it's a nice segue into the end of the discussion about the paintings. About 2/3 of the way through the painting, the painting and I start to have a conversation. And I start saying, okay, where are we going? And I'll go this way, we're going that way. And then I have to start making some artistic decisions. Not only about the mood or the feel of the painting, but where's the area of interest? Are the lines balanced? Things like that. So that adds to part of the answer to your question. Is that then I have to click in the left brain a little bit more and make some conscious decisions. But turning the board helps a lot with deciding what am I going to do next. Or sometimes it's just a freaking itch. I like drips, so I'm going to do drips.
Right.
It's not a.
So because you let that happen, right?
Yeah,
I
no,
can see myself overthinking it versus letting it happen, which is probably why I'm not an artist.
Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of how it.
So you must regret sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I regret asking? Yes. I don't know if I can get a paint. I believe it was this one, and that's my first triptych, and I screwed them together, so I painted it all as one. And that painting, for the most part, was painted horizontally, but it had a really precious, we call it precious, an area that was really precious. So let's say this area is really precious. So what do we do as artists, or I do, is we start painting around it because it's so precious. Because we just think it's so cool. Then you run into design problems and you run into integration problems. So yes, there are times where I regret, or times where I just sort of go, I know you're there, but it's time to go. And so anyway, that is my talk at this point, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Well, first,
Carol, what is your inspiration, or do you have sources of inspiration for your color palettes?